Welcome to part 3 of our missile dodge game. It's been a long time coming, and this is actually like take 4. Not that any of you know it, because I haven't posted or done anything with the earlier videos that I made. And it's like 10:41 at night, and I'm tired. I'm actually lying in bed. Useless details you didn't need to know. But hopefully I can do this relatively quick and do it correctly for a change. Anyway, um, I decided that it would be a little easier as we're looking at this missile dodge game, um, rather than adding in the missiles in our, in our full game, our one that looks, yeah, kind of like this. I had gone through and made a video of me putting in, and I realized it got a little complicated and probably, oops, let's run it, and probably, oops, not very good at this game. There we go. Um, yeah, look at that. Another missile comes in. It might be easier if we instead looked at this as a problem of just originally getting extra missiles in there and kind of taking out some of the other details, like the checking if it crashes and whatnot, just to make sure that we understand how arrays work. And so that's what this missile dodge part 3A is. All it is a, if I go to the design, all it has on here is a couple buttons which we'll be able to use to test adding a missile and whatnot, and the initial missile 0. And if I run it, all it does is has a missile go across. Kind of where we were with our other game, and then we're going to add some details so these buttons work and add more missiles. So if you look at the code, it's a pretty simple code right now. We've got a missile variable, a missile speed variable, and then a main function where we move the missile by the amount of the missile speed, check if it's off the screen. If it is, set it back on the left side of the screen, and give it a new Y location and pick a new missile speed. And then each time through the loop, we set the position of that image, that missile 0. Now, if I wanted to add more missiles, maybe the first thing that would be tempting to do, if I think about it, I'd have to create new variables. So I've got my first missile. I would also need then, a variable to track missile 1. And set that equal to -100. And I'd have to have a variable missile speed. Goodness, can't write there. Speed 1. And then if I wanted a second missile, I'd have missile speed 2, and then, or missile 2 and missile speed 2, and then so on. And I'd have to copy all of this code in here, and you'd see how very quickly we'd be doing a lot of copying and pasting code. And in my design mode, I'd be adding a whole bunch of images and hiding them and then eventually showing them as I need them. And that doesn't seem to be, and it isn't, a very efficient way to do this. So instead, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to, in my design mode, and you can do this now if you like, delete your missile. By the way, I would suggest something. I just got to remember I actually have that PNG. There we go. Okay, I would suggest starting with a blank screen, just like I've got here, with just the 3 buttons on it. This will be a little easier for doing the arrays. So, now of course I don't have a missile, so I need to actually create it. And rather than doing it in the design mode, I'm going to do it right here in the code. I'm going to add an image. And it will be to create the image, we do missile, or we give it an ID. So this is missile 0. And I'm going to put that PNG for the missile in there. That actually works. I think if I were to run it. Yep, I've got a sweet, really large missile now, which is kind of fun to watch. Okay, sorry. The reason is that the actual size of that image, as you can see, is a little bit bigger than what we had, so we'll do a set size as well for my image, which is called missile 0, and we'll set it to 100 by 100. So now I'm back to where I was just a moment ago. I've got my missile. One missile goes across the screen, changes location, it changes speed, etc. Now, as I started this video, I pointed out that, if we wanted, we could create a missile 0 speed, a missile 0 and a missile 0 speed, a missile 1, missile speed 1, etc. variables, but that seems highly inefficient. And that's where we're going to create a list or an array of them. And really, it's as simple as this. Now, instead of declaring a missile variable that is just one number, it's a list. In this case, it's an incredibly short list that has only one number, but I could very easily give it other numbers. And there. And now it's a list with 4 different numbers in it. And actually, just to illustrate how this works, I'm just going to get rid of my time loop for a moment. Console log missile 0. If I run that, missile 0 now actually exists. It's negative 100. And missile 1 is a variable, and it's 500. And you can see it print down here. Missile 3, because 0, 1, 2, 3 should print out 454. If I run it, hey, what do you know, it works. So now I've got essentially a list, and you can see how I can refer, without having to change the name of missile, I can refer to each of the different elements in that array. It's important to remember that arrays start with a 0 element, and then the first element, and then the second element, and then the third element. So if you have an array that's length 4, the last element is actually missile 3. And actually there's a fairly handy command, missile length. And what that will show is that there are 4 elements in that array. There's a 0 element, a 1, a 2, and a 3. So there's 4 elements total in that array. I point that out because we might end up coming back to that in a little bit. So let's go back to my original list with 1 element and 1 element in my speed. And although this isn't adding any efficiency initially, it will function just like it did before, and it'll be easier to add and take away missiles from our list. So now everywhere I've got that missile variable, my missile variable doesn't exist anymore. I'm now referring to missile 0. So I'm just going through here. Missile 0, missile 0, missile 0, missile speed, oops, 0, all these inside those square brackets, missile 0. The other thing that I want to do, and you'll see why in a few minutes why I want to do that. I've got the ID of my missile is missile 0, and as I create new missiles, I don't want them all to be called missile 0. I want them to be called missile 0, and then missile 1, and then missile 2. So I'm actually going to take this missile, the string that refers to the ID of the image, I'm going to break it up into a missile plus 0. So now we've concatenated the word missile and the 0, and I'm going to do that down here as well. So it's the same thing. It's just in 2 parts, and you'll see how that comes in handy. And then one more time in the set position. There we go. Let's turn my time loop back on. Reset and run, and yay, everything works the same way it did just a moment ago. All right. You'll notice when we run it, we get this little blip where, oh, maybe not. Yeah, where it briefly shows up on the screen and then disappears. One thing I might want to add here is a set position. This is fairly unimportant, but if you're a little bit, I don't know, we'll put it at negative 100, 200. If you're a little bit anal like me, you might want it to not ever show up on the screen. There we go. Get that blip. All right. Now let's make our +1 missile button work. So now we've got to have an on event. And first on event, our ID is our add missile button, and when we click it, we need to do a few things. First thing we need to do is add another missile. Now, I guess there's a couple different ways to do it. I think for simplicity's sake, I'm going to declare a variable called number of missiles. This is actually really redundant because the number of missiles is going to be the length of this array. But I think it might make a little more sense if I have that variable. And obviously I initially start with just one missile. Number of missiles equals 1. So the first thing I need to do is create a new image. Now, if I have one missile, I want it's missile 0. I want my next one to be missile 1. So I will declare it as missile, and so that it has a different ID. Instead of calling it missile 1, because then I could end up with a bunch of missile 1s, I will do missile plus number of missiles, because the number of missiles is going to be 1. At the end of this, I'm going to add a missile, and I'm going to increase that number. But first I need to do that ID for the image, and then I need the URL, which is going to be the same URL. Oops. I forgot to put my quotation marks around it. Try this again. There we go. My semicolon. You don't need to see this. I need to do the same set size. Oops. Set size. Oh, I don't know why I don't have quotations around that either. There we go. So set size, it's going to be the same ID, missile plus number of missiles. And the size is going to be 100 by 100, so it's the same size. And I'll do that same set position because, again, I'm kind of picky about that. And it'll be missile plus number of missiles. And we'll set it to negative 100. 100 or 200 or whatever. Alright, so now a new missile will show up. Beautiful. I can create new missiles. But I don't have anything to control the X location of my missile or the speed of my missile. And here's where I just want to, if I'm adding a missile, I just need to append something onto my list. So I'm going to append item. That's the command. What's the list? Well, the list is called missile. Notice this is not in quotation marks because it's an actual variable. I'm not referring to an ID of an object right now. So missile, and I'm going to append the item negative 100. That's kind of where it started. And I also need to append an item to missile, oops, yeah, missile speed. And similarly, I'll start it at 5 pixels per frame. So now I'm going to have some new variables here. The last thing that I need to do to get these to move, I think, is that, oh, I should also increase my number of missiles here. I'll just do plus plus. Let it grow by 1. So now every time I click it, I create a new image with a new ID, and I append something in here. So now I actually need to move that. Here again, I could copy this, right, and put in a 1 for each of my missile 1s. But what's great is I can use a for loop. For loops and arrays go together like ham and cheese, peanut butter and jelly, hot dogs and hot dog buns. That was bad, sorry. The reason they go so well together is because a for loop will iterate through a certain number of times. In this case, I can start it at 0 to refer to my 0th missile, and then I can do it as iterate through this as long as it's less than number of missiles. So I'll do the 0, the 1, the 2, the 3 if I've got 4 of them, and then I plus plus. So if you think about it, in my for loop, my I is going to be 0, and then if I have another missile, it's going to be 0 and then 1 and then 2 and then 3, as long as the I is less than the number of missiles. So it should iterate through the correct number of missiles for me. Then I'm going to tab out each of these things just so it looks a little nicer. There. What do I need to do? I need to move not just missile 0, but all of the missiles I have. So if I put an I in for every place I've got a 0, if we think about this for a second, the first time through my for loop, it will move missile 0 by missile speed 0. And then the second time through the for loop, I will be 1, so it'll move missile 1 by missile speed 1, and missile 2 by missile speed 2. And it'll check if missile 0 is over 320, and then if missile 1 is over 320, and so on. So again, all I'm doing is replacing all of these zeros with an I. Notice it works too, of course, with my IDs. Even though it's a string, it's going to be missile 0 and then missile 1. I, and I. Let's run it. And as I click, I get more missiles. This is fun. Okay, this is ridiculous now. Might bog down my program a little. Perfect. I think the next thing that I want to do is the subtract a missile one. So, back to my code. We're going to do another, whoops, where to go, on event. Let's drop this in here. On event, this time I'm looking at delete a missile. If I click delete a missile, what needs to happen? Well, basically the opposite of adding a missile, right? I can go number of missiles minus minus, so it'll drop one. I can delete an element, which is going to be my missile, oops, gotta use the ID here, so it's a string, missile plus number of missiles. And if you think about it, this will work again because if I had 4 missiles created, my number of missiles variable would be at 4. Well, now I've subtracted it, so now it's down to 3, and so I'll delete element missile 3, which is my 4th missile, because I have missiles 0, 1, 2, and 3. So that will always delete the correct one. And now I need to remove item from my list. And the ID is just number of missiles. Again, if I had 4 missiles, this number was at 4. It went down to 3. So I'm going to remove the index number 3, which is my last one in my list, my array. And I'm going to do the same for the other list, which is my missile speed, and that same index number of missiles. All right, let's run. So our add missiles works, and so does my removing them. And then I can add more again, and I can subtract more. This is too fun. The last button I put on here was like a start over button, and I put it on here for a specific reason, to illustrate one other common thing that we might want to do, which is delete a whole bunch of items in our list. So we're going to do my on event click start over. It's going to be very similar to my deleting a missile. In fact, in some senses, I could have created a function called delete missile, which did these things, and that'd probably be a more efficient way of doing it. I would just do it a certain number of times. But the important thing here is that I'm deleting things, and I want to delete it from the end up to the first one. I don't want to delete. Think if my list was like 4 elements long. I'm just going to pop in some numbers here. If I deleted this item first and then wanted to delete this one, well, this one would have shifted over, right? If I delete this one out, well, now this element became my second one and my length changed. So it's really better practice if I'm deleting stuff to make sure it doesn't mess up. Delete the last one, and then the second to last one, and then the third to last one, and so on. And so this actually is pretty easy for us to do. We just are going to do a for loop in like the reverse order. So for variable I, in this case I want it to equal my, well, let's actually do my, no, let's leave that, never mind. Number of missiles minus 1. That would be the index number of the last one. So if I've got 4 elements, again, this would be element number 3, which is my 4th element, 0, 1, 2, 3. So I want to get rid of my last one, so number of missiles minus 1. And I'm going to keep getting rid of them as long as, I is greater than 1. I think I do want to leave 1 element in there. Otherwise, I would do as long as I is greater than 0. I always got to stop and think about that for a second. Do I really want to go? No, I do want to go until it's greater than 0 because I want to leave just the 0th one. There we go. And then I minus minus. So again, we're using a for loop to iterate through the array. I'm going to get rid of all of my missiles except for the 0th one. So now it looks very similar to what we just had. Delete element, and the ID is going to be missile, in this case plus I. So it's the last one and the second to last one. We're going to remove item from my missile list. I'm going to remove the ith, the last one, and then remove item from my missile speed array. Again, the ith one because that'll be the last one, and then the second to last one, and then the third to last one. So again, I'm deleting them from the end. And then lastly, I'm going to set my number of missiles variables, missiles, back equal to 1, because now I've gotten rid of all of mine except for 1. And so now if I run it, let's see if this works. I can add some, I can remove some, I can add a whole ton of them, and I can click start over and I'm back down to just my one. The start over is probably something similar that you'll want to do in the game. When you crash or get blown up, you want to remove all of your elements except for one. So I thank you. I hope this has been useful. I hope you can figure out how to use an array, how to add some more. I will create a part 3B video where I actually incorporate this code relatively quickly into our missile dodge game without pausing to do as much explanation of how the array works. Yeah, so thanks for watching.